Beautiful. So one of the major themes that we hear from a lot of students, regardless of where exactly in the community they are, and this is true of both consulting and finance, is that it's very difficult when getting started, or even once recruiting has begun, to figure out what exactly is the landscape of this industry. So how do all of these different companies and business units and cultures and programs kind of fit together? And then ultimately the goal is where do I fit into that puzzle, and where might I like to work, and where do I have a realistic expectation of work. And so the purpose behind this particular conversation is really to give a little bit more nuance and depth to understanding how the realm of finance works, which of course, for anybody who's even poked at it, is a juggernaut of an industry. There's a lot of things going on. But what Alfredo is going to do is kind of break down some of those different pieces, at least from a high level. And then, as I said, you're welcome to ask questions as we move through. So we're really excited to have Alfredo with us tonight. He's one of our finance industry experts. He's also one of the most dedicated coaches we have. So he worked with dozens of students this past summer. And he brings a wide range of experience working in the United States and in Puerto Rico. And over the course of his career has underwritten more than $1 billion of municipal bonds and managed a portfolio of over $100 million. So a lot of great experience that I hope you guys will tap into as you're thinking of your questions. He also received an MBA from Georgetown and is now working in investment banking at Citi. So lots of things to ask about, and I think much of it will come to bear in his talk. And with that, I will pass it over to Alfredo. Thanks for joining us.
Perfect. Thank you, Oliver. So really quickly, I know this is kind of a big topic. I'll be focusing mainly on the career paths out of undergrad for what is basically the corporate and investment bank. So big theme here, there's basically two sides of the coin. When you're looking into a career in finance, especially on Wall Street, there's the public sector side, which is basically whoever deals with public information. These encompass your equity research side. This encompasses your sales and trading, or at least traditional sales and trading. And it's kind of a big track for a lot of analysts. On the flip side, it's basically the private information side. So it's basically when you talk about the Chinese wall or the regulations surrounding private information or non-public information, and the regulations that the SEC and FINRA have basically talked about. And this is where you normally locate your investment bank, your corporate bank, corporate bank, investment bank, and basically your syndicate desk. So syndicate desks are basically your underwriters. When you're issuing, whether it's an IPO, a follow-on, or debt, these are basically, they work with the investment and corporate banks in order to be able to underwrite and see the price levels for where you can issue. A big theme here is, I think every side of finance has its own personality. And by that, I mean, there are differences in the responsibilities as an analyst. There are differences in the working hours. There's a difference in even the working environment. Very traditional, and this is something that hopefully some of you, if you've started exploring kind of ideas within finance, you've started seeing, investment banking has that reputation for the long hours, and it's true. I currently work in investment banking, and investment banking is traditionally kind of the more, and not to deter anybody, but it's kind of the longer hours, more of the 2-3 years as an analyst. And a lot of people, whether it is they switch out to PE or they actually, a big push that now banks are doing is kind of promote from within. And it's the idea of analyst promote. So it's the idea that after you've become kind of a tech wizard and the modeling part, as an analyst, you can get promoted to an associate, which is where I currently sit in as an associate in investment banking. But let's kind of break it down. My idea here is to give you kind of an oversight of different roles that you can get out of undergrad, hopefully, whether it's for your summer internship experience or even full-time as you're graduating and starting a career. And let's start kind of with the more traditional ones. So investment banking, which is the one that I'm more familiar with because I was both an analyst and now I'm an associate. I worked at 2 different firms. So I worked at UBS originally as an analyst, and that's where I did a lot of the municipal underwriting. So I worked at a municipals group or public sector group within investment banking for UBS. We basically, what we advised government, states, municipalities, and different public entities in underwriting and being able to work through the whole underwriting process for them to be able to either issue new debt into the markets or refinance some of their existing debt. So in investment banking, this is kind of the longer hours. It is a very competitive process when it comes to recruiting, and that's something that I feel, it should be highlighted. Investment banking tends to draw, just like consulting, it tends to draw a lot of applicants, and it's because it's one of those really big names out there that people are very much aware. I remember as an undergrad at Yale, there were two big career paths. You either were going to do consulting and you were, doing your case preps and doing all that it entailed for you to interview to do a consulting role, or you were going investment banking. And investment banking kind of entailed a lot more about getting to know your story, getting to know your why investment banking, why XYZ bank, as you were prepping, as well as some technicals. And the technical aspect in investment banking, and this is something that happens, I think, across finance, is basically you have to be able to demonstrate that you have a basic grasp on some accounting and finance. Nothing too deep, nothing too complicated. It's more about being able to not have the deer in the headlights stare in your face as you're going through an interview for most of your finance roles. But investment banking, so overall as an analyst, what are you responsible for? So responsibilities for investment bankers as analysts is basically controlling models, whether it's an IPO, an LBO, a comps, spreading comps, or doing preceding transactions. Basically, analysts are the Excel gurus. So they basically work very hand in hand with the rest of the team, but they're very, very much in tune with the numbers. So they're very, very savvy when it comes to building numbers. They're very savvy at making them flexible. And by that, I mean making them be able to run various scenarios as the MD kind of sees it fit. Another thing that analysts are really good at in investment banking is PowerPoint. So I think when you're going into investment banking, two of the things that you should be interested in, or at least have an inclined to, is developing your Excel and your PowerPoint skills. Hours really do range bank to bank, but I would say anywhere from 80 to 100 hours a week is something that's typical for a summer internship. The idea there is you're not going to be, doing something every hour in those 80 hours a week, but you are kind of there, you're kind of the backup to anything that could happen, whether that is, we need an extra pair of hands to kind of turn some comments that an MD just pulled in, or let's go through a model and see if we can find any busts or any areas that kind of concerned us. But this is in reality kind of the longer one. As we going through work commitments, this is kind of the longer hours you will have. It tends to be very gratifying. As an analyst, I know that after a year or so being an analyst at UBS, a lot of other employers were very willing to kind of interview me and look at me just because of the mere assumption that they knew that I was hardworking. By being in investment banking to some way, shape, or form, you are proving to yourself and to others that you can handle a full workload and that you can do the long hours. Interestingly enough, something that I've seen, and I think you might all be aware if you're in contact with some of your upperclassmen, is the idea that investment banking has kind of started shifting. So as part of, the financial crisis and everything that's happened, and as well as, to be fair, the increase in tech companies and startups, investment banking has started focusing in HR, and a lot of upper management in some of these big bulge bracket banks have started refocusing their efforts in hoping to establish a better work-life balance. And it's something that I think we aren't quite there yet in terms of comparing ourselves to tech companies or other roles that you can out of undergrad. But it's fair to say that I think the effort is there. I used to talk to MDs and they would say, we basically work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I remember when I was an analyst, I was the 24th of December, I was running around trying to get signatures for my MDs and being able to clean up so we could close the deal before the end of the year. And that was sort of something that I know I'm not that old. That was probably 8 years ago, but nowadays I feel like they've made a much better effort. For example, Citigroup has policies in place where from basically Friday night till Sunday noon, you won't be working. So you can plan around hopefully having your Saturdays to yourself, being able to have, your friends, also your Friday nights, be able to plan dinners or go out with your friends. That's kind of something that I think the general industry is going towards. And I see as you all kind of are growing or are getting older and looking into this career, that's something to consider, that maybe the reputation, or at least the negative reputation that investment banking has had in the past, is no longer kind of there. With that, I feel the next logical step is corporate banking. So CB is basically a mirror of investment banking. The biggest difference between CB and IB is that corporate bankers don't deal necessarily with CEOs. They're mainly dealing with treasurers of companies or CFOs. And the idea is corporate bankers really look at the balance sheet of companies. So they're basically saying or advising on what's the ideal capital structure. And by that, they're working with rating agencies and being able to maintain a certain coverage ratio and rating. They're advising on what type of loans and what type of debt structure a company should be pursuing, or at least in order to meet their financial goals. Corporate bankers, like investment bankers, do work long hours, but it's safe to say that they would say if bankers are doing 80 hours a week, corporate bankers are doing somewhere like 65 to 70. So it's a bit less stressful. Something that's really interesting that I think I find is corporate banking is smaller in size. In terms of when you see platforms of similar banks or in the same bank, they tend to have fewer headcount. And the idea here is, of course, it's not that it's less work, but it's more of a routine type of work. Every single quarter when earnings go out, basically you're updating a lot of Excel sheets also, but you're basically making sure that your companies, that your clients, and potentially even in a place like Citigroup, where we do have a lot of loans outstanding with a lot of our clients, that those loans are being serviced and those loans are being covered correctly based on covenants. And so corporate bankers, huge emphasis on the balance sheet. But at least at certain platforms, at least at Citi, I can tell, they do work hand in hand with the investment bankers and they do manage relationships. So as a corporate banker in a coverage group, your MDs, equally as investment banking MDs, are handling relationships with clients. It's just, instead of necessarily looking into an M&A activity or an IPO, you're mainly focusing debt. So debt is kind of that main focus. From there, we basically move on to what is called a syndicate desk. At Citi, we call it originations desk. But the idea here is you basically have a mirror image of what sales and trading could have, which is you have an ECM, an equity capital markets, you have a debt capital markets, and probably a leverage finance. These are bankers too. They do handle a lot of private or confidential information or non-public information. They are on the execution side. So mostly they get involved with investment bankers or corporate bankers when a client is going to market. And by that, I mean when the client is actually getting ready and they've decided to give you a mandate to do an IPO or a follow-on, then you would bring the equity capital markets bankers in order to give you an idea of what is the appetite. Very special about the syndicate desk is that unlike investment bankers and corporate bankers, they do have the ability to talk to sales and traders to at least see what the market and what the market appetite is. In simple terms, for example, if you're trying to issue $1 billion of debt in X amount of years, the syndicate desk is really looking at how much you need to price that debt in order for people to be interested in buying or at least investing in an opportunity. Similar to that, you do it with an IPO or a follow-on. They are very execution. The good thing about being in a syndicate desk in general is that you're working mainly in market hours, which means that you're working Monday through Fridays. There is some back-end work at the end of the day, but mostly it's updating and making sure that whatever your investment banking or corporate banking counterparts are presenting to clients at the end of the day is correct and does reflect what happened in the markets that day. So these are kind of experts in the sense that they are closely monitoring the market, and instead of being just modeling and doing, what investment bankers or corporate bankers might be doing in Excel, they're more inclined to be following Bloomberg, following macro trends, being able to follow, news, and really following what's going on and what could trigger kind of changes in pricings and kind of their ideas. Really interesting is that I have also found is that they do have an expertise when it comes to structuring. So they're the ones that a lot of times investment bankers might have the broader idea on how to be able to execute a transaction, but they're the ones that are going to say this is feasible, whether it's, for example, a 10-year bond is feasible. or not. So that's kind of the syndicate desk. And these roles tend to be smaller again, not necessarily a lot of open opportunities, but the good thing is syndicate desk as well as corporate banking a lot of times only hires at the analyst level. There's theories out there. Sometimes what we say is that since they don't burn out their analysts as much, they tend to promote a lot more from within, and they have a natural pipe for future talent as they're going up, because they don't tend to leave the industry as they don't tend to leave the industry as the 2-3 year mark comes along. From here, we really do pivot into the public sector side. So this is when you're using only public available information. It's no longer you're no longer dealing directly with clients, but really looking at what the market has to say and what the market what is there available, whether it's company filings or any events that are public knowledge. And we start with sales and trading. I actually sat in a sales and trading desk for 2.5 years. And you are really focused on two big roles as a sales and trader. The first one is the sales side, which is basically when you're trying to do more of a client relationship role. You're dealing with big funds, whether that's T. Rowe Price, Vanguard, hedge funds that are looking to employ capital. These are potential clients of yours that are looking to, they have cash on their balance sheet. They wanted to put it to work because they're not using anything else. And they're looking for ideas, whether that's an investment in equities or an investment in debt. Salespeople are really about a strategy. They're about selling an idea of a company, selling the idea of, for example, Citigroup to its clients, and being able to service those clients and their needs when it comes to being able to create liquidity for some of their products or securities that they might be invested. The second side of sales and trading is the trading side, and this a lot of times deals with market making. So it's and when you hear the word market maker, it's basically you are creating a buy and sell market on a certain security. Interestingly enough, traders do also have the ability, and I used to do this, was that you could also trade on behalf of your company. So it's not only trading your client's money or your client's investments, but it's also being able to trade your own company's for-profit accounts. And this is what it's called prop trading or proprietary trading. There is a lot of regulation on what you can and can't do currently when it comes to prop trading, but a lot of the times, as long as you're not front-running clients, the general rule is as long as you're not front-running your own clients, then you can trade on securities. Finally, when it comes to a finance role, there's one last piece when it comes to the analyst role, and that's the equity research side. Equity researchers, similar to sales and traders, sit on the public side. They look at company filings, whether it's quarterly or annually. They look at company events in order to be able to kind of follow through with what they would recommend their investors. So equity researchers really do a fair amount of modeling, to be fair. They do carry their own models. They basically value a company, and based on their models and very similar models to what investors do, they are able to advise clients whether or not a bond or an equity should be a buy, a sell, or a hold. When you look at equity research, normally it's anywhere from like 3 to 8 pages, not too in depth. Basically, the idea is you're looking into your coverage universe, and you're on an ongoing basis giving your advice on whether or not you believe the company is good or not. The big difference between equity researchers and investment bankers when it comes to the modeling is that investment bankers a lot of times deals with private information, so they are able to talk to management into deals and kind of have more of an insight of how the company's working, and because of that, they're not able to publish. Equity researchers basically look at what's available publicly from a company, and out of that, they make their own assumptions and they build their own models in order to be able to serve the general public. Interestingly enough, there's a lot of regulations of why equity researchers and investment corporate bankers can't talk to each other. A lot of it has to do with not favoring certain clients because they're investment banking clients. But whenever you're going as an investment banker, you're going into an IPO or you're going to do a follow-on, a lot of times you will have an equity research from your own firm covering that client. You aren't able to influence, you're not even supposed to talk to an equities researcher from an investment banking standpoint, but it is one of the services that is offered to the clients of both sides. So that's a very general level. I would say if I had to kind of rank these, if I had to rank this, so investment bankers, I literally did it as the more hours to the shorter hours when it comes to a day. Caveat being, investment bankers tend to be the longest hours a day. The difference is, and it goes investment banker, corporate banker, syndicate desk, and then you cross over to the public side, and then you have equity researcher and probably sales and trading. Sales and trading tends to be some of the more fast-paced environment on a day-to-day basis. However, their days are kind of an 8 to 5:30 kind of thing. So they tend to be some of the earlier people in the bank because they do get there before the markets open, but they are able to leave closely after the markets close. So that's kind of when it comes to time commitment and very overall kind of brief introduction to each one. When it comes to the role, I think, and what I've told a lot of my mentees is you really need to figure out what your personality really entails. And one thing that just because the herd is recruiting for investment banking or another XYZ role, whether it's consulting, I think one of the biggest things that people don't, or at least really underestimate, is the ability to really be self-aware of what you like. I remember when I was going through my own recruiting process, I was the type of person that, I could do long hours. I normally slept in undergrad. I was sleeping anywhere from 7 to 8 hours, but that was more than enough for me to kind of keep going. So when I was considering a career, investment banking didn't seem that bad, in the sense of the hours weren't really what I feared, right? It was more of, I think what I was wanting to pursue was more of that idea of being able to develop the Excel and the PowerPoint skills in order to be able to employ them efficiently. Something that I wasn't completely aware was the amount of work that goes in. Something that you all should know is, while it sounds that 80 hours is a lot during the week, the reality is when you're in investment banking, a lot of it doesn't happen during lunch hours. And by that I mean from 12 to 4. There's basically a downtime a lot of times, and the reason or rationale because of this is because your MDs a lot of times are out, doing client visits. They're going out to lunches. So it tends to have, for example, what I've told a lot of my analysts now that I'm at Citi, and even myself, is sometimes we do go out and are able to run errands during the day just because we know it'll be kind of more dead. So if you have a doctor's appointment or you need to go to the dry cleaners, that's kind of the time that for me during the week, I know I'll be able to have. Some people take advantage of this and they go to the gym. They're able to kind of lead a more healthier lifestyle in that sense, versus if you go to sales and trading, I can tell you that when I was doing sales and trading, you sat down somewhere between 8:15, 8:30, waited for the market to open at 9, and you basically had a nonstop deal book going through for the next 7 hours. So it was high paced, very intense, very rigorous. A lot of times what we would do, at least in my desk, was we would cover each other for lunch, but your lunches weren't more than 30 minutes. Sometimes it was a busy day or there was a lot of IPOs or different offerings kind of coming to market. Then you would bring your own lunch, or you would, buy something really quickly and bring it back to the desk. And the idea there is, that's a different lifestyle. It tends to be very high paced. It tends to be very hectic during the day, but then the idea is after those 9 hours, then you're done, you go home, and there's nothing really you can do. Versus investment banking, a lot of times, you're working throughout the night because you're able, at that point, MDs are available, they're being able to do comments, they can look at presentations, they can look at decks, they can look at models, and that's when a lot of the conversations really do happen between junior and senior bankers. On a spectrum, I would say corporate bankers have a similar lifestyle. The idea there is that since they're not pitching as much M&A or other types of ideas, their work tends to be a bit more routinely, and that's why their hours don't extend as far. Their MDs are definitely meeting because they do handle a lot of relationships with clients, So the MDs are definitely out during the day. However, their work tends to be a bit more streamlined when it comes to what they need to present and how many comments they would get back. I can tell you that the presentation, for example, in investment banking that I've worked with an MD can take anywhere from 15 to 25 turns. And by turns, I mean it's 15 and 20 to 25 iterations of the same presentation, getting comments from different parties, getting comments from different MDs, getting comments from different members of the deal team. You just get that many comments because it's probably the first time that you're presenting a transaction to a client, or at least the first time that you're updating or something new has gone on that you want to be able to showcase to the client, versus a presentation in corporate banking can take anywhere to 5 to 10 iterations, and that's normally good enough. A lot of the iterations, interestingly enough, come from being able to really make sure the numbers are ticking in time. Because remember, when you're working in corporate banking, you really do want to make sure that your cash flows that you're forecasting, that all the informations are going to be there and are going to be strong enough in order to be able to cover your interest payments and your debt payments. From a sales and trader standpoint, there's very little modeling that goes into play. So, for example, if you do want to develop your Excel skills, then that's maybe not really the first place I would look at. Sales and trader look more into Bloomberg. They develop different technical skills. So as a sales and trader, you no longer are in Excel and PowerPoint, but you're on Bloomberg basically 24/7. That's kind of your go-to key. They do have a lot of analytics within Bloomberg, and that's kind of how you go about it. For equity research, you do get a fair amount of Excel exposure. I would say that, and that's one of the fields that I'm least experienced with. It's mainly reading equity research and then interacting with them when I was in sales and trading. But the idea with them is that they cover a very set or a limited number of companies, and their kind of business cycle really goes up and down in the sense of when companies aren't reporting, then you don't have as much work or updating that happens. Normally, the only updates that you have out of your quarter reporting for your companies is if anything happens in the market, whether it's there's a big company that defaults on their debt, or a company that gets restructured, or an M&A that happens. Those are the things that might trigger you to have to redo some of your research reporting. But other than that, most of your research, and I would say anywhere from like 75 to 80% of your work, happens during reporting season. So when companies are reporting their earnings and they're updating their guidance, that's when a lot of the equity researchers are extremely busy, and that's when you would do your very long hours. And it tends to be a week and a half during a trimester that you might be doing crazy hours. But then after you're kind of over that hump, you go back to more normality, and it's more about monitoring than really running very extensive models. So that's kind of my take on the industry. I know I've been seeing a lot of questions, so I don't know if at this point it'd be interesting to kind of take some of the questions, because I feel like I might be able to cover some of you guys' interests.
Cool. Let's do that. Can you hear me, Alfredo?
Yep.
Good. Perfect. So yes, we have gotten a few questions. First of all, thank you for providing such a good overview. To those who were on the call, as before, please feel free to drop questions into the chat box, and we will kind of address them in order. So a first one for you, and this comes in part from ones that were submitted and just some thoughts I had as you were speaking, Alfredo, is it sounds like you've done quite a bit of kind of bouncing around different contexts. As a result, you've become pretty attuned to the different cultures and different workplaces and the kinds of people that you're surrounded with in some of these various roles that you've had, not to mention the content of the work and kind of the lifestyle involved. And I know that most recently you've actually moved into kind of social impact investing and kind of trying to understand where that might go and understanding that, which is a much newer field. And so I'm curious, from the perspective of a lot of students who are probably on this call, who are either just getting started or maybe have just completed or are going through and wrapping up their first round of recruiting, probably not very much context in terms of beyond, the shininess of IB and the, relatively more opaque realms of equity research, et cetera. What do you think is kind of an ideal strategy to begin weeding through some of the noise that exists on campus and figuring out where might I really fit? Is it a question of kind of research and talking to people in each of the different business units and, trying to build a little bit on what you just gave an overview to? Is it about applying to all of them and just seeing, who ends up connecting when it comes to interviews? Is it choosing the most competitive, something like an IB, and trusting that later down the road you can kind of change gears? I think there's a lot of strategies somebody could take in approaching that question. I'd be curious. Maybe it's just, what did you do to get where you are now? Or if you think maybe there's a better way to do it, what would you recommend?
Yes. This is a great question. It's something that, if I'm being frank, I did not explore when I was an undergrad. Only now that I've gone through the MBA and have actually had a few different experiences have I seen my advice when it comes to actually recruiting for finance is first take a step back. At this point, most of you have had at least a year of undergrad. You've seen how your work style is. You've seen whether or not, I remember comparing myself to some of my classmates, and some people were morning people and they were able to kind of get up really early and go through the day, and they were really productive during those 8 hours. Other people were not, were more of night owls. I would say really the first step I would say, judge yourself, be your harshest critic, in the sense, get to see where you see, what are your priorities? What are the things that you want to get out of? And then from there on, the second logical step for me is, and I think by just starting to reach out to Modern Guild and applying to some of these programs, that is an amazing step that I never did when I was an undergrad. But something that I think everybody has, whether or not you're applying to Modern Guild, is upperclassmen. So one of the best resources that we have, and something that is very ingrained into an MBA program in business school, is that the second years kind of pay it forward, and they're the best resource for people under them that are thinking about pursuing a career similar to them. So I would say get involved, whether it's finance clubs or different social groups on campus. Make those connections with people that have possibly, whether it's over the summer or even might be returning full time, and ask them the questions. Ask them what was their day to day. What was, what are some of the pros? What are some of the cons? What are some of the things that drove them to do it? What are some of the things that I think one of the best moments I had was when I asked one of my mentors why weren't they going back even if they got the offer. And getting those insights really at least start ticking and tying kind of whether or not you think you'd be able to be successful in some of these roles. To be fair, I think as an analyst, you can't go wrong in the sense of any experience that you go out and you pursue and you're successful at, doing your summer internship and hopefully going full time, spending at least a year. And I know it sounds like a lot, but a year goes by really quickly, especially when you're learning a lot and kind of really thrown into the fire. It goes by really quickly, and before you know it, there are opportunities out there. I do have to say, and I know it sounds kind of like I'm tooting my own horn, but doing investment banking does pay off, right? I've had a lot of my analysts, and I've had really good conversations with them now that I'm an associate, and they're like, look, I'm here for a year or two because I know it'll pay off, whether it's because it'll launch me into a career that I'm looking forward, whether that's PE, whether that's corporate development, whether that's corporate finance. But it does give you some sort of check in your resume that really does help. I've also seen, which is at least at Citi, and I know that's something that it might be company specific, but across the bank, if you're looking to do a lateral hire or doing a transfer within a big bank like Citi, most groups see an investment banker as a great resource. So just by coming from investment banking, and I've had a lot of friends and peers that are older than me that have been successful at transferring within Citi, being able to do their year, 2 years, 3 years of investment banking, and then moving into corporate development internally at Citi, or moving into an equity capital markets. So that's kind of, at least I would say, the first one would be make sure you are honest to yourself. 2, get to know some of your upperclassmen. Those tend to be very safe zones because they're not company employees. They're not really evaluating you. More than anything, you're trying to get to them to share their experience, and that's how you're trying to then get some of the intel. And then from there on, I would say get involved with programs like Modern Guild, and then as you're going through the recruiting season and actually going through recruiting for summers, make sure you're attending events, make sure you're looking at, and depending on where you go to school, you might be at core school for certain banks, attend all their info sessions, attend their receptions. A lot of the banks have like open sessions over the summer where they invite students that are in the New York area, for example. And those are things that are normally, if they're not in the career websites of your prospective universities, they do tend to be advertised in the websites of the companies. So if you're targeting a set amount of banks, make sure you're checking in on them, whether it's, March, April, checking in what activities they might be having for potential, nowadays, what I'm extremely surprised is how early analyst recruiting starts, at least at the investment and corporate bank. These are processes that are in place starting May, and by August, September, they're basically already shortlisting to final round. So it's extremely early. I would say, I know depends on what year you're at, but I would say, have a plan of attack and keep yourself to it.
Got it. So there's a lot of questions coming in now, so maybe we'll fly through a few of them. One coming from Maria Marquez in the University of Notre Dame is, what is it about your current role that keeps you from switching industry and companies? So, after having experimented with so many different work contexts, what makes what you're currently doing really exciting to you?
Yeah, so I think as an associate, it's different than an analyst. As an associate, I am delegated a lot more responsibilities that I really do like. I'm a type of person that does like to forge bonds with my coworkers. I'm becoming I think working with analysts is extremely rewarding. Being able to see them kind of develop just like I'm developing as a manager. So I think I'm getting more exposure as a manager, being able to manage people below me, as well as getting more exposure to senior level. So having an MD reach out directly to me, having conversations with directors and VPs, even managing. So one of the first things that I was recently exposed to was I was basically managing a conversation with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. These are things that I feel, at least for me, are really rewarding and are really helping me grow professionally. So it's something that keeps me busy, keeps me kind of wanting to go back for more, and keeps me kind of very vested. I think one thing about investment banking that I do have to say, and it's one of those things, I experimented with sales and trading, and I came back to investment banking. And the reason why was because sales and trading is extremely fast-paced, very hectic, very adrenaline-driven. But there's a curse in sales and trading that is a lot of traders tend to fall prey to routine, and kind of it's a rinse and repeat, which is something that I started doing. I'm the type of person, I know myself, I get bored when I start repeating and just doing the same thing over and over again. And that was something that I started seeing in my MD at the desk. I saw that they were looking for the same type of ideas. They were looking at the same corners when it comes to, potential arbitrage opportunities or, buy and sell kind of arbitrage. And that was something that I was kind of hesitant to just continue down the path, versus when I'm doing investment banking, I know every single client that I deal with is going to be a different situation. They're going to have a different need. Their personalities are going to be different. How they want to handle a process is going to be different. So it's kind of like every single time I take on a new client or a new deal, it's kind of a new challenge. And that's something that, at least for me, it really motivates. And that's something that you need to figure out for yourself. Are you someone that likes to be motivated or challenged every single time, and kind of, it's not that you're reinventing the wheel, but you do have to fine tune it. It's not that you can just, rinse and repeat every single time and just, reuse and rehash. Investment banking, it tends to be that every single client wants to be, personalized, and every single transaction has to be personalized, because you're not dealing, if I were to go to market now versus when the financial crisis happened, it's very two different scenarios. So it's about adapting to every single time and every single transaction.
Nice. Again, for those who are listening, please feel free to drop questions as we go. Another one for you. So a lot of these questions, or at least the topic we've approached kind of from the abstracted lens of somebody who's peering from the outside in and just getting started. But one question that we have, and I can't figure out who asked it, V20, a blue circle, is what tips do you have for those who've already secured an internship, specifically in investment banking, but maybe you can answer it from a little bit more of a broad lens. So already have an internship for summer 2018. What are the best ways to prepare and to get ready for that experience? Perfect.
One thing that I would say is center yourself. I've told so many of my analysts and even my associates, I had associates this past summer, I told them, enjoy your spring semester. Make sure you get to do the things that you are that you've wanted to do, that are on your bucket list, whether that is, on campus or in the city that your university is at. make sure that you're getting away. A lot of what happens in the work, you learn on the job, right? So there's not that much prepping that you need to do. Sure, you can take an advanced accounting course or an advanced finance course, and that might give you more knowledge into the industry. But the reality is, if you were successful recruiting, that knowledge that you had for the interviews is more than enough to get you started when you start during your internship opportunity. And that goes across the board. When you go into a sales and trading desk, every desk has its own way of doing work, and you're normally paired with a mentor, whether that's someone that's equally as junior as you, that will walk you through the processes and walk you through a transaction and walk you through, where are the files and what are the Excels and what's the formatting that every company does. Same goes for investment banking. A lot of it you learn on the job. One thing that I do have to say, and it's extremely important, is over summer internships, no matter where you're at, it's like a 10-week interview. Your attitude is the most important element for you to get that return offer. It's not that you're going to be the smartest person in your class. It's not that you're going to be the quickest person in your class. It's that you're going to be there and you're going to have a positive attitude, and that it might get grueling and it might be long hours, but you're there and you're showing yourself with a very proactive kind of work mentality, that you're really showing that you're trying to learn, that you're trying to help out. The reality is no intern is going to be doing the most crucial of work by themselves. They're always going to have an analyst, an associate that's there to kind of hold their hand and guide them through the process. They're going to let you take a stab at stuff and then review it. So it's not that whatever you'll be creating over the summer will be, the most crucial piece of information that will go directly to the CEOs. There'll be filters in place, and everybody's aware that if you're there for 10 weeks, you're not going to be the expert. You're not going to be, the know-it-all, and you're not going to be perfect. So whatever you're doing, as long as you're doing it from a good place and that you're putting in the time and the work, and that you have a positive attitude and your willingness to learn, that's what's going to make you successful over a summer internship. That's the type of thing that people are really looking for, because in the end, what they want to make sure is that when you come back full time, that you'll be able to put in the time, and that eventually you'll get up to speed, and 6 months to a year down the road, then you'll be the one paying it forward and teaching other potential summers or other new recruits in the back. So that's kind of the most important. That's why I say, over your spring semester, if you've already secured your job, get to enjoy it. Do the things, because the reality is those 10 weeks might feel draining. You might not have as much freedom to do your own thing, but again, it's only 10 weeks and they fly by, they go by really quickly. So, your spring semester, get it out of your system, enjoy, try to really, build your relationships, talk to your family, your friends, whatever the case may be, but just prep yourself mentally. And if you can, get into a healthy habit of, getting some rest, being able to kind of accustom your body to kind of, I had a routine and I still do it. Whether or not I get out of work at 8 or at 2 a.m., I get home, I make myself sleepy cup of tea, and that's kind of my way of ramping down and be able to put myself to sleep, whether it's because I'm just going to sleep 7 hours or I'm going to sleep 4. But that's something that you'll learn as you go, because it is kind of hard to maintain 100 hours a week. And to be fair, I'm going to be very honest, and I know some banks might be mad at me for saying this, but I think the summer is probably the most grueling time that you'll ever have to do. When you come back full time, it gets better in the sense of you'll start learning how to manage your time. The people around you won't be necessarily sitting around waiting for someone to give you work. You'll either have work to do or you'll go home. And that's the reality. I have analysts right now that sit with me, and I have analysts under me that when they have nothing to do, it could be 5:30, and I'm like, go home, enjoy your afternoon, cook yourself a meal, I don't know, go out with friends, because maybe next week it might not be as happy, and next week we might be on a live deal and we might be working till 2 a.m. But over the summer that tends to be different, FYI, because people are expecting you to stick around.
Yeah. Cool. All right, let's get a couple more in here. So I think from MD, although I'm not positive if that MD is the student MD, what would you suggest students who, you talked a little bit about how the recruiting process works and how it tends to, especially it's very forceful, and there's a wide awareness around especially banking and consulting at a lot of the target schools that these companies and firms have an active presence at. But what would you recommend to a student who doesn't go to a school where a lot of these banks show up in person and do recruiting? How would you say that they should stand out and get involved in that process, other than something like Modern Guild, which of course exists for exactly that purpose.
Yeah, I was going to say, the first thing is Modern Guild. But getting involved with sort of any opportunities that come along like Modern Guild, that will at least give you that chance to start the recruiting process, even if you're a non-target school. For non-target schools, it is slightly harder. There are different initiatives, and talking to a lot of my colleagues across the banks, across the streets, target schools for one company aren't necessarily the same for another. So one thing that you do need to be open to if you're in a non-target school for a certain bank that you might really want to is considering other options, considering other banks that might be recruiting at I know, for example, if you're out in the Midwest, then a lot of like William Blair and some of the some of the Midwest IB firms that are amazing, and I have friends at, do recruit there, and they mainly source from the Midwest schools. Another thing to consider is boutique banks. So boutique banks are specialized banks that normally, for example, you can name a boutique bank like Evercore, which is basically one of the best, but they basically focus on M&A. They get the name of boutiques because they're not they don't do every single sector across all sectors, right? So certain boutique banks tend to have very specialized, they tend to be smaller, it's true, just because they're more focused in what they offer their clients. However, they don't tend to have even target schools to begin with. A lot of the boutique banks just recruit, since they recruit a small, it's a lot on the student to kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting, making sure that they're reaching out, that they're going to the website, that they're applying, that they're dropping their resumes. That's one of the things. That's the first step for any boutique bank. Any boutique bank that I've ever had friends recruit at, a lot of it is on the front end, it's kind of on the student's responsibility. From there on, it's really about, I would say, and we could all go through a whole session on LinkedIn, but making sure your LinkedIn is up to date, it's professional, it's presentable, and then from there on, start building your network, right? We all have, to some way, shape, or form, friends that have intern work at, whether that's, because they're upperclassmen, because they were in the same sports as us, whether because they were involved in extracurriculars, but we do have those friends. And part of recruiting smartly as a non-target school is being able to leverage those networks, being able to leverage those opportunities and those people that can get you in, right? I've actually helped a few of the Modern Guild students at Citigroup, and part of it was just, me being able to put in a good word with HR would put them in their radar, and that was more than enough to have them have a first round, right? From there on, of course, you do have to be able to prep and have the interview skills to be able to be successful in a first round. Your resume, of course, that's something that you do have to work and put in some time in, because that is basically, if you're not coming from a target school, then your resume is going to be the first thing that they see before they are even on campus, or before they even have you on the phone. A lot of times it's the resume, and being able to have a clean resume. And by that I mean, go to career services in your school, and the first step is having them take a look at it, make sure that you're using a good template, that it's clean, that there are no mistakes. You have no idea how many. And I've had conversations with HR where people will throw out a resume for incorrect grammar or punctuation or extra spacing. And it's because when you think about it, a bank, so we just ran a sophomore leadership program. I did Super Days at Citi, and we received, I think it was 3,200 applications for 32 spots. So that was a 1% return rate. HR was doing anything they could to just, kind of filter out and get a smaller number, because there was no way that you were going to get bankers to look at 3,200 resumes. They looked at, I think in the end, the core schools, I was in the Georgetown recruiting team, and we looked at 100 resumes. And from there, we had to pick two. Of course, one of the ones that we ended up recommending was because there was someone within Citi that was willing to put in a good word. So being able to leverage that network as a non-target school is very important, right? And sometimes it's literally using Modern Guild. It's using, I know there's various programs depending on what diversity you are. I know there's female conferences, there's minority, like there's veteran networks that you can definitely leverage, and that those are, I think, very key as you're going through the recruiting process.
Beautiful. So I'm just looking through. I think we have time for maybe one more question. If anybody wants to submit one, I'll give it a few seconds. Otherwise, I will go ahead and ask. Anybody at all? Okay, we'll end on a more detailed question because I see that this has been repeated a few times. Alfredo, the question here is about, personally in terms of your own career path, why did you choose to go to the associate level as opposed to moving to a private equity firm? And I think the follow-up question here is, why did you choose investment banking over some of the other options that a lot of senior people will move into? So invest, private equity firms, hedge funds, VC, et cetera. So I think you did speak a little bit to why you enjoy your specific role, but maybe if you could just touch on what some of those other worlds are and how you see, people in your relative position move to those or choose not to.
Yeah. So I think so there are basically two times in your life where not necessarily two times, but there are two big points where you can break into private equity or hedge funds or VC firms. And that's after you've done 2 to 3 years as an analyst in investment banking, you can break into a PE, VC, or hedge fund opportunity, and you'll go to be an analyst in one of these. So the idea is that you've already had the expertise of modeling, and you've gone through. You're basically, an expert in Excel, because the last thing they want is someone, them having to teach someone how to Excel or how to model. So this is one opportunity, but in the end, you do go in as an analyst, right? So you're still doing a lot of the footwork. You're kind of, for me at that point, I thought it was kind of repetitive. It's true, it's less work because you're more targeted in what companies you're evaluating in any of these firms, so that the workload isn't as bad. But in reality, it was very repetitive in the sense that you would be modeling for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your life. The second big part is once you've had enough capital, you've accumulated some capital that you can eventually vouch to become a partner, or at least an associate with the path of becoming a partner. So that's when you've actually accumulated some wealth and you're able to put in your own. A lot of the hedge funds, private equity, and VC firms, and anywhere middle management and up, their expectation is that eventually your own money will be invested within the fund. So you do have to it's basically like you have to bring the ante in order to be part of it. And I'm not quite there yet, right? It's something that I've actually considered. Eventually, I've worked with multiples of hedge funds when I was in sales and trading. I was working with a VC fund in down DC when I was working in PE. Part of the other thing that really concerns me about the industry when it comes to PE, VC, or hedge funds is that there's nowadays, especially in the past 5-10 years, there's been a proliferation. They've just spread all over. Part of it is because there's a lot of cash out there. There's a lot of people that want to invest but don't really know what to invest it in. So they've been able to kind of create these funds that, in the end, and we've seen it. I don't know if some of you have been following, but firms like Matlin Patterson, who used to be great and successful, have just had so much cash flood into them that they have no opportunities to invest in because there's no good opportunities. The last thing you want to do as a fund manager is to invest for the sake of investing, and then burn your career, have a bad reputation, get bad returns or low returns. And some of these companies are facing that right now. So at least for me, in my perspective, I think, we are going to see a recession of funds out there, or at least, some of them are sadly going to have to go out of business because I think there's way too many of them. And I didn't think I was wise enough right now in my career to be able to choose which one's going to survive and which ones aren't. So I thought, why not hone my skills, build up some of my capital, get some of my managerial kind of expertise under my belt in order to eventually, whether it's I want to partner up with someone or, join a firm on the buy side, that might be an opportunity. But I mean, err on the side of caution to all of you. I know you're all young and you're all going to be hopefully very successful. But a lot of these firms, I mean, the amount of recruiting that they're doing, and the reality is, think about it. It used to be the case that these firms would only recruit from a handful, and there were only a handful of firms even recruiting to begin with, versus nowadays, I feel like every single bank, their analyst class is recruiting in some way, shape, or form. So that means that there are so many of these companies out there. And what are they really investing in? That's something that I think you should all, as if you ever consider recruiting, make sure you get to know the company, make sure you get to know what they're investing in, how successful they've been, how much cash they still have to deploy, because that's something that is going to play, whether it's, a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alfredo. That was wonderful. We're going to wrap it up here for our students on the call. Stay tuned. We've got 2 more kind of large format events before the holiday break. So one of them is, for those of you who are also considering consulting, it's an open office hours with also one of our coaches, Mark Larrick. And then there's also another finance event next week focused on common sense technicals. So we've heard a lot about Excel tonight. That's going to focus on some quick checks that one can do, especially during the interviewing process, to make sure that you don't make any crazy mistakes that you could have anticipated. So as far as follow-up, you will all receive a survey right after this call, and that'd be really helpful both for Alfredo and for us, so we can continue to improve these workshops and make them really targeted around questions that you all have. And I'm sure, Alfredo, you can speak to it, but if anybody has any follow-up questions, for sure you can email either me directly at oliver@modernguild.com or info@modernguild.com, and we can package those and send them over to Alfredo to do with as you wish. You also all received his LinkedIn as part of the event, so feel free to, if you're active on there, that's another option for you. But anything else on your end, Alfredo?
That is all. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, and thanks for joining, everybody. This was great. And thanks for being such an engaged audience. Always a great thing to see. All right. With that, we will end. Feel free to take off. Thanks, guys.